The Criminal Life of Archabaldo de la Cruz. In 1955, Luis Buñuel released a film that subtly bent cinematic norms. The Criminal Life of Archabaldo de la Cruz, a dark Mexican comedy, centers on a privileged man obsessed with murder but incapable of actually committing one. More than just a character study, it's a biting satire of upper-class repression, laced with surrealist symbols, clocks, mannequins, mirrors, all nodding to fractured identity and suppressed desire. While critics in Europe and Mexico praised its bold tone, yet American audiences hardly paid attention. The mid-century US market wasn't exactly eager for foreign films critiquing Catholic guilt or bourgeois hypocrisy. Some speculate the film's obscurity stateside traces back to Buñuel's politically charged reputation and his association with leftist intellectual circles, which may have made Hollywood wary during the height of McCarthy-era paranoia. Still, the film has since attracted a fervent following, especially among fans of Buñuel's later masterpieces like The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. It's an underrated jewel from his Mexican period, one that dared to turn existential dread into dark comedy, long before that became the norm. Night of the Hunter. In 1955, Charles Laughton, better known for his commanding screen presence than any film work behind the camera, made a daring foray into directing. His first and only film, The Night of the Hunter, landed with a thud. Critics were split, audiences were perplexed, and the studio discreetly shelved what they saw as a tonal misfire. Yet buried beneath its initial failure was a cinematic time bomb. Robert Mitchum's chilling performance as Reverend Harry Powell, a preacher with love and hate emblazoned across his knuckles, was unlike anything seen in American cinema then. Some reviewers found it too grotesque, too strange, too excessive. Some in Hollywood alleged the film had rattled preview audiences so fiercely that studio executives lost faith before its release. Laughton, reportedly heartbroken by the backlash, never directed again. Nonetheless, The Night of the Hunter refused to fade. Over the years, directors like Martin Scorsese, Terrence Malick, and David Lynch cited it as a reference point. Anecdotes mention that Stanley Kubrick kept a copy on hand for inspiration. Its surreal lighting, stark shadows, and eerie child's eye perspective now appear decades ahead of their era. In 1992, the Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry, sealing its place in film history. Once dismissed as a misfire, it now casts a long shadow over contemporary thrillers. The Tall Target. Unveiled in 1951, The Tall Target took a daring gamble. A noir-inflected thriller situated not in dimly lit streets, but aboard a 19th century train heading to Washington, D.C., with Abraham Lincoln as the unseen mark. Directed by Anthony Mann, famous for his cutting-edge westerns, the film stars Dick Powell as a brooding detective certain there's a conspiracy to stop the president-elect before his inauguration. The end result is a gripping blend of historical narrative and suspense, packed within the tight confines of a moving train. While tales of political assassination weren't new in early Hollywood, few films of that era leaned so explicitly into the distrust and ambiguity that would define later noir. Many believe its tense themes, national trepidation, political aggression, and public suspicion, hit a raw nerve for post-war audiences longing for assurance. Despite favorable reviews, it slipped out of theaters, overshadowed by more upbeat offerings. In the years that followed, critics like Kevin Thomas lauded it as a coiled-over thriller that arrived before audiences were prepared. Whispers also claimed the film was surreptitiously shelved in some regions out of concern it would kindle political unrest, a notion never substantiated, though it enhances the film's enigmatic stature. For aficionados of concealed noir with a historical slant, The Tall Target is a hidden treasure worth pursuing. Pickup on South Street. Pickup on South Street didn't dominate theaters in 1953, but it struck a chord few films dared to address. Directed by Samuel Fuller, it arrived during peak Cold War anxiety, just as anti-communist sentiment was simmering in the United States. The story follows a savvy pickpocket, portrayed by Richard Widmark, who unwittingly snatches microfilm intended for Soviet agents. But the real turmoil wasn't confined to the screen. According to cinema experts, the FBI reportedly pressured Fuller to alter the script, calling for a more flattering depiction of federal authorities. Fuller rebuffed most of the demands, retaining the gritty, cynical, and unwaveringly street-level tone. Some accounts claim the Bureau kept tabs on the film's debut, wary of its nuances. Thelma Ritter, as Mo the Informant, delivered a performance so raw and poignant it earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Critics were divided. Some labeled it subversive, others applauded its audacity. Over time, Pickup on South Street carved out a niche as a noir that didn't flinch. A film that captured the paranoia of its day without sugarcoating the murky moral terrain. It never aspired to comfort, and that's precisely why it remains so memorable. The Breaking Point. Few films from the 1950s embody post-war disenchantment quite like The Breaking Point. Released in 1950 by Warner Brothers, this overlooked Hemingway adaptation featured John Garfield as a cash-strapped fishing boat captain, a portrayal many critics now laud as his most emotionally intricate. Unlike the glossier, loosely adapted Bogart-Bacall version from 1944, The Breaking Point remained faithful to Hemingway's novel To Have and Have Not, embracing its moral ambiguity and financial despair. Director Michael Curtiz, the same visionary behind Casablanca, brought a raw authenticity that was ahead of its time. However, the film hardly caused a stir. Although Garfield had long been under political scrutiny, his formal testimony before the House Un-American Activity Committee took place in 1951 after the film's release. Still, some argue the aura of suspicion already encircling him led Warner Brothers to exercise caution. Reports indicate the studio deliberately kept promotion subdued to avoid controversy. The film slipped unobtrusively into theaters with minimal backing, despite its credentials. Garfield died in 1952 from heart-related complications at just 39, and few dare to propose that political stress hastened his decline. Many years on, The Breaking Point has been restored and re-evaluated by movie scholars, now deemed one of the most loyal Hemingway adaptations and a compelling example of American noir realism nearly obscured by Cold War silence. On Dangerous Ground. Released in December of 1951, On Dangerous Ground faded into a sea of more formulaic noir releases. On the surface, it seems standard. A hardened urban detective of vicious killing, icy streets. Yet it was far from an ordinary crime film. Its sudden tonal shift puzzled many viewers at the time. Directed by Nicholas Ray, it focuses on Jim Wilson, portrayed by Robert Ryan, a short-fused, emotionally hollow cop whose brutal methods force him to take on a rural case. What starts as a gritty city drama abruptly transforms into a serene, near-spiritual reflection on remorse, sorrow, and atonement, a jarring transition that left audiences unsettled. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times dismissed it as grim and dismal, but beneath the bleak surface lay a deep investigation of fractured masculinity, a motif recurring in Ray's oeuvre. Tension between Ray's aspirations and the studio's commercial aims further complicated matters. RKO Pictures allegedly trimmed key sequences, particularly those shedding light on Jim's emotional journey, reducing the runtime to 82 minutes. Several film academics argue that such meddling watered down the film's cathartic punch. Bernard Herrmann's score, a disquieting, string-heavy arrangement, heightened the film's psychological dimension. Better known for his later collaborations with Alfred Hitchcock, Herrmann created a sonic tapestry mirroring the protagonist's internal turmoil. Music historian Stephen C. Smith once called it a passage between menace and mercy, and it stands among Herrmann's most disconcerting yet underrated compositions. Ida Lupino's portrayal of Mary Malden, a visually impaired woman whose stoic resolve offsets Jim's anger, provided the film's emotional core. But that wasn't her only involvement. Speculation holds that she stepped behind the camera to oversee parts of the film when Ray fell ill, a remarkable move that would place her among the earliest women to direct a studio production in the 1950s. Though uncredited, multiple cast and crew members hinted at her role. The film's reclamation began years afterward. In 2005, the Criterion Collection unveiled a restored version, rekindling interest in Ray's intended approach. Critics gradually reframed it not as a botched noir, but as a captivating experiment that ventured beyond genre boundaries. Dave Kerr characterized it as a film about healing disguised as a thriller. Some cinephiles believe its stark, snowy landscapes faintly foreshadow later films like Fargo or Wind River, each probing moral gray areas against frigid backdrops. While no formal link exists, the thematic echoes are undeniable. On Dangerous Ground landed off target in 1951, but its emotional weight, deconstructed structure, and subtly bold choices have granted it a renewed existence. It's more than just a lost noir. It's a film that dared to explore what lies beyond violence when vulnerability takes hold. Try and Get Me. Debuting in 1950 under the title The Sound of Fury, this noir treasure disappeared from screens nearly as fast as it emerged. Later retitled Try and Get Me, the film failed at the box office, though controversy might have shaped its brief run. Drawing from the real 1933 vigilante killing linked to the Brook Hart incident in San Jose, the storyline delivered a piercing look at mob justice and sensationalist reporting, topics that post-war America was unwilling to probe deeply. Helmed by Cy Enfield, the film spotlights Howard Tyler, an unemployed ordinary man who becomes entangled in a kidnapping scheme that balloons into a national scandal. Its apex, the moment a furious public overruns a jail, was so gripping that some accounts claimed it led certain viewers to leave the theater. Whether genuine or a myth, the notion only augments the film's allure. United Artists removed the film after a short distribution, officially citing lackluster receipts. Yet a few cinema historians claim its stark candor and disturbing real-world parallels rendered it a lightning rod. Enfield, already under the microscope during the McCarthy era, was subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee. He refused to comply and soon moved to the United Kingdom, continuing his work far from Hollywood spotlights. His blacklisting didn't merely hamper his own path, it buried Try and Get Me for decades. Critics now regard it as one of the fiercest denunciations of mob brutality in American film. Noir authority Eddie Muller once dubbed it a scalding critique of American justice, and it's easy to see his point. Guy Rowe's cinematography enhances the film's suspense, and Frank Lovejoy's portrayal of a conflicted journalist adds a surprising measure of heart. Others propose the film's release date doomed it. In a nation yearning for post-war hope, Try and Get Me forced an unsettling perspective. Perhaps the greater menace lies not in the criminals, but in the baying crowd cheering them on. Hell Drivers. Released in 1957, Hell Drivers is a British action noir that punched far above its weight, and still somehow fell by the wayside. Directed by Cy Enfield, an American exiled by the McCarthy-era blacklist, the film centers on Tom Yateley, a newly released convict who finds himself in a cutthroat trucking operation where drivers are pushed to complete 10 gravel runs a day or lose their job. The result is a high-octane workplace drama that doubles as a bleak commentary on post-war labor exploitation. The cast reads like a who's who of future icons. Stanley Baker leads, but look closer and there's Patrick McGoohan as the dangerously competitive Red, Herbert Lom, William Hartnell, and a young Sean Connery in one of his earliest significant screen roles. Connery's brief appearance isn't flashy, but it's a fascinating glimpse at a star in the making. Several cinema aficionados propose that Enfield's outsider perspective sharpened his lens on British class friction, giving the film its raw, relentless energy. Despite its fierce pacing and standout performances, Hell Drivers never got a proper theatrical rollout in the United States. The British Film Institute points to a mix of distribution snags and the film's unapologetically working-class tone, something American studios weren't keen to market at the time. As a result, it developed a devoted following in the UK, and remained nearly invisible elsewhere. Critics have since circled back. In 2021, The Guardian's Peter Bradshaw dubbed it a lost classic of British cinema, praising its stripped-down realism and moral ambiguity. Its DNA runs through later action films that traded gloss for grit, and while it's not always listed in mainstream retrospectives of the era, cinephiles and scholars alike continue to champion it as a forgotten cornerstone of British post-war cinema. Whispers persist that the film's intense driving scenes influenced subsequent vehicular thrillers, though no direct lineage has ever been confirmed. For anyone digging into the overlooked corners of 1950s cinema, Hell Drivers isn't just a rare find. It's a full-throttle time capsule of industrial-era desperation, filmed with the urgency of a man who knew what it meant to be pushed to the edge. Gunmans Walk. Released in 1958 with sparse publicity, Gunmans Walk is a western that strayed from the genre's customary gunslinging and black-and-white morals. Instead, director Phil Carlson, better known for crime noir like Kansas City Confidential, offered a taut family drama in a frontier setting. Van Heflin plays Lee Hackett, a domineering ranch owner whose need for control sets his sons on a destructive course. Tab Hunter, often dismissed then as a teenage idol, amazed critics with a fierce, emotionally charged portrayal of Ed Hackett, the privileged yet volatile younger son. The film scarcely attracted notice upon release. Some contend it was too morally murky for viewers used to triumphant frontier epics. Others point to its understated exploration of race and masculinity, issues seldom examined in westerns of the period, as factors in its discreet sidelining. One subplot featuring a Native American character was notably measured in its depiction, a striking contrast to the widespread cliches of the era. Though the New York Times afforded only mild approval in its 1958 critique, deeming it a conventional western, modern reviewers have reconsidered it. Film noir historian Eddie Muller reportedly hails Gunmans Walk as a rare western that grapples with psychological turmoil instead of gunfights. Certain observers draw parallels between its bleak sensibility and the post-war fatigue typical of noir cinema. Despite the backing of Columbia Pictures, the film never gained commercial traction. Legends whisper that studio higher-ups were unsettled by its somber themes and shortage of unmistakable heroes. Whatever the cause, Gunmans Walk vanished from the spotlight. It's seldom shown, little discussed, and almost never featured in film curricula, yet it endures as an audacious, emotionally resonant standout in a decade replete with formulaic westerns. The Scarf. The Scarf, released in 1951, slipped past the mainstream radar with a story that was arguably too unsettling for its time. Directed by Ewald André Dupont, once a silent era standout whose career dimmed with the rise of sound. The film follows a man on the run from a psychiatric institution, played by John Ireland, as he tries to untangle a murder he may or may not have committed. The plot dives into themes Hollywood rarely touched back then: institutional power, fractured identity, and blurred reality. Critics didn't quite know what to make of it. The New York Times called it confused and confusing in its March 1951 review, and most outlets ignored it altogether. But buried under its uneven pacing is a film that took narrative risks others avoided. Mercedes McCambridge, fresh off her Oscar win for All the King's Men, delivered a performance that still sparks debate. Some dare to guess her character, enigmatic, emotionally layered, and morally ambiguous, might be one of noir's earliest female anti-heroes. Noir enthusiasts have begun re-examining The Scarf as a bold, if flawed, psychological thriller that pushed the envelope when few dared. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.